It's an early production sandcast.
And so it came to pass, I found myself managing director of the old Triumph company when it was in very low water. That, which was a pretty comprehensive machine, and it was quite a fast machine, so quite a bit.
In September of 1960, the most famous man in the British motorcycle industry flew to Japan, walked through Honda's factories, and wrote his board a report telling them exactly how their industry was going to die. 9 years later, Honda shipped the CB750. 4 years after that, BSA, the company he wrote the report for, no longer existed. That report survives. You can still read the whole thing today. The strangest part isn't the deadly accurate warning, right down to the production numbers that would destroy them. It's one single sentence buried in the middle, one sentence that gave the entire British motorcycle industry permission to ignore everything else on the page. To understand why this report mattered, you have to understand who wrote it, because Britain did not send an accountant to Japan. They sent Edward Turner.
And there wasn't much money about, and that I had to design something that would make impact. Started designing what afterwards became the Speed Twin, and it was an immediate success.
Turner designed the Triumph Speed Twin in 1938, the parallel twin engine that essentially became the British motorcycle. Every Bonneville, every BSA twin, every bike Marlon Brando made dangerous-looking traces back to his drawing board. By 1960, he was managing director of BSA's automotive division, which owned Triumph, which made him roughly the most credible witness the industry could have chosen. When this man said something about motorcycles, boards listened. That is the entire tragedy in advance, by the way. They did listen, they just heard the wrong part. The trip itself had a clear job. Japanese motorcycle production was growing fast enough that London wanted eyes on the ground, so Turner toured Honda, Yamaha, and Suzuki, took notes, and asked questions. He went in confident. He had examined Japanese bikes before and rated them highly, but nothing he had seen from a distance prepared him for what the factories looked like from the inside. The Honda plant at Hamamatsu was 3 years old, windowless, air-conditioned, and designed for one purpose. Components moved through the building on conveyors. Assembly ran on timed stations, on moving bands, the way cars were built, except nobody in Britain was building motorcycles that way. Nobody in Britain was building motorcycles anywhere near that way. Honda kept 400 technicians on staff purely to study new designs, new techniques, and new manufacturing methods. 400. Triumph's entire approach to product development at the time could charitably be described as one legendary designer and whoever was not busy. Suzuki told a version of the same story. Before the war, they built weaving looms. Turner found their factory even more mechanized than Yamaha's, casting its own parts, forging its own components, fully self-contained. Everywhere he went, the machine tools were new, first class, and 85% Japanese-made. The only British equipment he spotted in 3 factories was a set of gear cutters. That was the United Kingdom's entire physical presence inside the Japanese motorcycle industry. One tool. And Honda was already constructing a 3rd factory at a cost of over £6 million. In 1960, money. For a company most British executives still filed under cheap imitation. Turner wrote one line about the experience that I think about a lot. He called it a dynamic experience and a somewhat frightening spectacle. The most decorated designer in British motorcycling stood on a Japanese factory floor and used the word frightening in an official company document. That is not a man being dramatic, that is a man doing math. Because the math was the report. Turner did not send home impressions, he sent figures, and the figures made the argument on their own. Japan was producing well over 500,000 motorcycles a year. The entire British industry, every marque, every factory combined, was producing 140,000. Honda alone was approaching 250,000 units, which meant one Japanese company was outbuilding the whole of Britain by a comfortable margin, and Honda was one of more than 20 Japanese motorcycle companies operating at the time. Then there was Yamaha, and this one should have ended the meeting. Yamaha was a piano company. 5 years before Turner's visit, they were not in the motorcycle business at all. By the time he walked their floor, they had a factory twice the size of Triumph's and were producing 80,000 units a year. A musical instrument maker had entered the industry from a standing start and outgrown Britain's most famous brand in 60 months. Turner put the comparison in the plainest terms available to him. Britain, he wrote, had never consistently built 1,000 units of any single product in a week. Japanese factories were doing it in a day, and here is the number that should have kept the board awake, because it defined exactly how exposed they were. Triumph sent 49% of its output to export markets. BSA sent 35%. The report laid it out without decoration. The Japanese were coming for those exact markets, with better equipped factories, larger engineering staffs, and prices roughly 20% lower. The British industry's entire financial structure depended on customers Japan had already decided to take. There is even a line in the report where Turner turns his frustration on the British press. He wrote that the revelations of Japan were truly shocking, and that he was amazed more had not been published in the national newspapers that claimed to keep the country informed of world developments. Think about what that sentence is telling you. The scale of the threat was visible to anyone who bought a plane ticket, and in 1960, essentially nobody in Britain outside that report knew it existed. The industry was not just unprepared, it was uninformed by choice at every level, from the newsroom to the boardroom. So the board of BSA sat down sometime in late 1960 and read a document from their own managing director that contained everything: the capacity gap, the investment gap, the engineering headcount gap, the price gap, the specific markets that would be attacked. 9 years of advance notice in writing from the one man in Britain they had no grounds to dismiss. Which raises the obvious question: how does an industry read that and do nothing? The answer is in the same report, and this is the part of the story almost nobody tells. Deep in the document, after the frightening factories and the impossible production numbers, Turner offered his personal judgment on what it all meant for Britain. He wrote that he did not believe the Japanese motorcycle industry would eclipse, in his words, the traditional type of machine that the British motorcyclist wants and buys. Japan built small commuter bikes, refined little machines for transportation. The big sporting motorcycle, the proper motorcycle, the thing Britain actually made, that market was safe. Read that again in context. The same document, the same author. Page after page proving the Japanese could outbuild, out-engineer, and outspend the entire British industry, followed by a personal assurance that they probably would not. Turner handed the board a fire alarm and a sedative in the same envelope, and the board took the sedative. Of course they did. The warning demanded a total reinvention of how Britain built motorcycles, new factories, new tooling, new designs, enormous capital spent during the exact years the companies were most profitable and most able to spend it. The caveat demanded nothing. It said the customers you have will keep wanting the thing you already make. When a board is offered a version of the truth that requires no action, that is the version that gets minuted. So the alarm was filed. No modern design investment followed. A pair of engineers sketched a 3-cylinder engine in 1963, and that sketch went in a drawer where it stayed for years. Turner himself retired in 1964, and the industry he warned went back to building 1938's engine architecture with 1960's chrome. The problem with the sentence, the reason it detonated 9 years later instead of just aging badly, is that somebody in Japan read the market exactly the opposite way. While Britain was reassuring itself that Honda would stay small, Honda was in a conference room deciding to build the biggest, most advanced motorcycle in the world, on purpose, aimed at one target. Honda's own account of the CB750 program reads less like product development and more like a firing solution. In October of 1967, the specification was fixed, and the two numbers they chose tell you everything about the intent. The engine would be 750 cubic centimeters. The output would be at least 67 horsepower, and that figure was not an engineering estimate, it was a message. Harley-Davidson's 1,300 cubic centimeters flagship made 66. Honda specified 1 more horsepower than the biggest American motorcycle on sale, from an engine roughly half the size. And part of what triggered the timing, according to Honda's own history, was intelligence that Triumph was developing a 750 triple. Britain's long-delayed counterpunch is what convinced Honda to throw the knockout first. In February of 1968, they assembled a team of about 20 engineers. 20 people against an industry. Within 6 months, there was a running prototype 4, and when they dropped that engine into a test chassis, the project hit its first real problem, which tells you everything about where this program was headed. The bike was too fast. One of the lead engineers' documented headaches before the Tokyo show was figuring out how to calm the thing down enough to sell to the public. While British engineering meetings were about extracting a little more from a pre-war architecture, Honda's were about how much performance to withhold. In October of 1968, the finished machine appeared at the Tokyo show, and in March of 1969, the first production unit rolled off the line. 17 months from a locked specification to a shipping product. Remember the drawer in Britain with the 5-year-old engine sketch in it. And what shipped was not a refined commuter bike. It was a 736 cubic centimeters overhead cam inline 4 making 67 horsepower, with an electric starter, a 5-speed gearbox, 4 chrome exhaust pipes, and the first front disc brake ever fitted to a mass production motorcycle. 15% more power than BSA's brand new Rocket 3 at roughly the same weight. Technology that, the year before, existed only on Grand Prix machinery, now sitting on a showroom floor with a warranty. Then Honda did the cruelest thing available. They made it cheap. When American Honda's president announced the price to a room of 2,000 dealers, $1,295 over $1,000 under anything comparable, the room reportedly broke into applause, and the order frenzy that followed was strong enough that Honda simply raised the price on the spot. Even at the revised $1,495, the comparison was ridiculous. The big British and American machines it embarrassed were selling for $2,800 to $4,000. Honda planned 1,500 units a year and cast the early engine cases in sand because they were not sure the thing would sell. Demand forced them to 3,000 units a month. Roughly 40,000 CB750s left the line in the first year alone, most of them headed for the exact export markets Turner's report had named. Every advantage that made this possible, the factories, the tooling, the 400 technicians, the pricing power, was itemized in a document sitting in BSA's files, 9 years old, gathering dust. What happened next happened fast, and I want to keep the timeline tight, because the speed is the indictment. The CB750 reached dealers in 1969, the same year the BSA and Triumph Group stood at the peak of its export trade. On paper, the moment looked survivable. Britain had the Rocket 3 and the Trident, that 1963 sketch finally dusted off and rushed into production, and the group's badges still carried real weight in America. 2 years later, BSA posted a trading loss of £3 million. Their own official history states the figure. The response was a panicked slate of 13 revised models that arrived late, missed the market on both sides of the Atlantic, and solved nothing. By late 1972, the chairman of BSA was in front of the British government explaining that the company could no longer meet its obligations, and that without intervention, Barclays Bank was preparing to appoint a receiver. The government's solution in 1973 was a forced merger, folding the remains of BSA and Triumph into a new entity called Norton Villiers Triumph. Consider what that rescue actually means. The industry that spent the 50s telling itself it led the world was now a line item in a government intervention, stapled to another struggling manufacturer because no private buyer wanted the pieces. The BSA name did not survive the paperwork. In their own words, 63 years of non-stop production ended abruptly in the summer of 1973. 4 years. That is the distance between the CB750 arriving in showrooms and the company that received Turner's warning ceasing to exist. 9 years of notice, 4 years of collapse, and at no point in the 13 years between the report and the receivership did the British industry build a genuinely modern motorcycle to answer the one it was warned about. The machine Honda built did not just outsell the British twins, it made them look like products from a different era, because that is literally what they were. Riders who walked into a showroom in 1969 could buy an engine designed before the war, with oil leaks sold as character, or they could buy a 4-cylinder with a disc brake and an electric starter for less money. The market did not agonize over that decision. Markets never do. So go back to the report one more time, because everything that happened was in it. The production numbers were right. The price gap was right. The named export markets were the ones that fell. The prediction that 4 or 5 Japanese companies would become immensely powerful was right. Turner's report, read today, is close to a perfect forecast of the following decade, written by the exact person whose warnings should have carried the most weight, delivered with 9 years to act. The only thing in the document that turned out to be wrong was the one sentence that made everybody feel better. Japan would not come for the proper motorcycle, and the industry did not act on the 90% of the report that was correct. It acted on the 10% it wanted to hear. That, to me, is the actual lesson, and it has nothing to do with motorcycles. Institutions are rarely destroyed by what they do not know. They are destroyed by the part of the truth they decide to believe, because it is the part that lets them keep doing what they were already doing. Britain did not lose its motorcycle industry to Honda in 1969. It lost it in a boardroom in 1960, the day the most accurate warning in the industry's history was read, acknowledged, and filed. Honda just collected. If you rode through that changeover, if you owned a British twin when the CB750 landed, or you were one of the riders who crossed over and never went back, tell me what that decision looked like from the seat. And if you think the board was right to trust Turner's sentence, given what they knew in 1960, make that case in the comments. I will read it.